The war had started like any other, with the smallest flicker of tension between two factions that had long been at odds. The Scarans, a technologically advanced species from the distant edges of the galaxy, had always seen humanity as a minor player in the grander scheme of the universe. But the humans, who had evolved on a world far away from the grandeur of galactic civilization, were about to show the universe that they were much more than just an insignificant speck in the cosmos. The first shot was fired when a Scaran's fleet, overconfident and unprepared, crossed into a sector of the galaxy long considered humanity's domain. It wasn't supposed to be a battle. It was supposed to be a diplomatic gesture, a show of force, a way for the Scarans to remind everyone of their dominance. Instead, it turned into a catastrophic miscalculation. Humanity, with its unique ability to adapt, to improvise, and to fight with a determination unlike any other species, took the Scarans completely by surprise. The first human fleet, led by Admiral Rachel Carter, was smaller than the Scarans had anticipated, but they underestimated the power of human ingenuity. Within hours, Carter's fleet managed to disable the Scarans' flagship, throwing the entire fleet into disarray. This single event sparked what would soon be known as the Galactic War. The war was brutal from the start. The Scarans retaliated with unimaginable force, sending waves of warships toward Earth and its colonies. However, the humans, unlike any other species the galaxy had seen, didn't crumble under the pressure. Instead, they adapted, learning quickly from every battle, improving their tactics, their technology, and their strategy. Every victory, no matter how small, gave them the fuel they needed to keep pushing forward. On Earth, the leadership of the human race came together in a united front. Governments that had once been divided, fractured by political ideologies and territorial disputes, now put their differences aside to focus on the one goal that mattered: survival. The war had become an existential threat to humanity, and they would not go down without a fight. Meanwhile, the Scarans, confident in their technological superiority, continued to underestimate the one thing that made humanity truly formidable: its spirit. For every loss, for every city destroyed, for every ship sent into the void, the humans only grew more determined. They fought with a ferocity that could not be matched by any species the galaxy had ever known. Admiral Carter became a symbol of hope, a beacon of strength for humanity. Under her leadership, the human fleets began to gain ground. Their advanced strategies, combined with cutting-edge weapons and their unrelenting resolve, allowed them to push back the Scarans, taking back the colonies they had once lost. But it wasn't just military might that helped them succeed, it was their willingness to take risks, to think outside the box, to use tactics that no one else had ever dared to try. The Scarans, who had once viewed humanity as nothing more than a blip on their radar, began to realize the true power of the human spirit. They had never encountered a species that fought with such unrelenting passion, a species that refused to bow down even in the face of annihilation. As the war dragged on, it became clear that this would not be an easy victory for either side. Humanity had learned to fight back, but the Scarans were not about to back down. What had started as a simple territorial dispute had now escalated into something far larger, something that would change the galaxy forever. The Scarans were determined to destroy humanity, to wipe them from existence, but the humans were equally determined to prove that they would not be easily defeated. And so, the war raged on, with no end in sight. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and every battle, every skirmish, would have consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The Galactic War had only just begun, but already it was clear that this would be a war that changed everything. It would change the way the galaxy saw humanity. It would change the Scarans' perception of their place in the universe. And most of all, it would change the way every species, every civilization, understood what it meant to fight for survival. And through it all, humanity would continue to rise, proving that no matter the odds, no matter how impossible the challenge, they would always fight back. As the war stretched on, the Scarans found themselves caught in an unexpected dilemma. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for innovation and adaptability, but now, they were facing a new kind of resistance. The human colonies, once seen as weak and vulnerable, had become fortified bastions of defiance. Earth, their homeworld, was the heart of their defense, but the colonies had evolved into hubs of technological advancement, each one contributing to the war effort in unexpected ways. Humanity's first major breakthrough in the war came when a team of scientists, led by Dr. Elijah Matthews, discovered a way to reverse engineer Scarran's advanced energy shields. The Scarrans had relied on these shields to protect their massive fleets, making them nearly invincible in battle. But the humans, working tirelessly in hidden research facilities scattered across the galaxy, cracked the code. The moment the shields went down, the tide of the war began to shift. With their newfound advantage, the human fleets launched a series of brutal, decisive strikes. Entire Scarran's fleets were decimated, and their once dominant warships became sitting ducks in the void of space. The Scarrans were not used to facing a force that could fight on their level, a force that could outthink and outfight them at every turn. What had once been a war of attrition was now turning into a series of increasingly humiliating defeats for the Scarrans. Admiral Carter's strategy had become legendary. She had always been known for her brilliant tactics, but with the new technology in hand, her ability to predict Scarran's movements and strike when they were most vulnerable had become nearly prophetic. As more and more Scarran's warships fell in battle, their leadership grew desperate. They realized that the humans, despite their relative lack of technology compared to their own, had begun to turn the tide of the war with sheer willpower and genius. But the Scarrans were not without their own contingencies. As the losses mounted, they unveiled a weapon so devastating that it would change the course of the conflict. A doomsday device, hidden deep within the core of their flagship, the Cormac. The Cormac was a warship unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, capable of unleashing a weapon that could obliterate entire planets. If activated, it would bring an end to the war, but at a horrific cost. The Scarrans had always known they could never truly defeat humanity without committing a final, irreversible act of destruction, and the Cormac was their answer. The weapon, known as the Devastator, had been in the works for centuries. It was an ancient Scarran's technology, designed to harness the power of a dying star and focus it into a beam capable of erasing entire civilizations. The Cormac's crew was under strict orders to deploy it only if the Scarrans were facing total defeat, and now, that moment had arrived. News of the Cormac's activation spread like wildfire across both sides of the galaxy. The human military had no way of countering the Devastator's power, and the Scarrans knew it. It was a weapon of mass destruction, a last-ditch effort to wipe humanity off the map. The galaxy was on the brink of annihilation, and the humans had no choice but to confront the Scarrans head-on in a final, desperate battle. The human fleets, still reeling from their success in crippling the Scarrans' forces, were now faced with the impossible. A doomsday weapon capable of ending the war, and perhaps the galaxy itself, loomed before them. But even in the face of certain destruction, humanity refused to back down. The call to arms was sent, and every ship, every fighter, and every soldier rallied to the cause. The entire human race, once thought of as weak and divided, had now become a united force with one singular purpose: to prevent the destruction of everything they had fought for. The final battle was set to take place in the depths of the galactic core, where the Scarrans had positioned the Cormac for its devastating attack. The stars around them burned with a fierceness that reflected the intensity of the conflict. The battle for the future of the galaxy was about to unfold, and it would be a fight like no other. The fate of every living being in the galaxy hinged on the outcome of this one battle. The Scarrans were determined to unleash their weapon, to erase humanity from existence and prove their superiority once and for all. But the humans, with their unwavering determination and unrelenting spirit, had other plans. They would not let the galaxy fall into darkness. They would fight to the last man, to the last ship, to the very last breath, because they knew one thing above all else: they would not go quietly into the void. As the battle lines were drawn, the universe watched in anticipation. The war that had begun with a spark was now set to explode into a cataclysmic conclusion. And at the heart of it all stood humanity, a species that had risen from the ashes of their own destruction, determined to change the course of the galaxy forever. The final battle had arrived, and with it, a sense of gravity that weighed on everyone involved. In the heart of the galaxy, in the shadow of the dying star that powered the Scarrans' doomsday weapon, humanity prepared for its ultimate test. The Cormac, looming like a specter over the battlefield, was a symbol of the Scarens' desperation. It was their last hope, a weapon of unmatched destruction that they believed would finally crush the human resistance. Admiral Carter stood on the command deck of the Endurance, one of humanity's largest and most powerful warships. Her face, though battle-hardened and resolute, betrayed the weight of the decision she had made. It wasn't just about victory or defeat. This battle would determine whether humanity had a future in the galaxy, or if they would be wiped out as just another fleeting species. Carter knew that this was no ordinary fight. Every ship in the human fleet was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the human race, but even with their new technologies and strategies, they were still outmatched. The Cormac's Devastator could wipe out entire fleets with a single blast, and humanity's forces had no weapon that could match it. The odds were impossible, but that was the one thing humans had always excelled at, defying the impossible. The Scarens' fleet, led by the Cormac, slowly drifted into position. They were confident, secure in the belief that their weapon would end the war. Their command ship, with its dark, menacing silhouette, hung like a shadow over the human forces. The Scarens' fleet was massive, every warship a symbol of their technological superiority. Yet, Carter didn't flinch. She had spent years preparing for this moment, and now it had come. The human fleet was scattered across the battlefield, smaller in number but far more diverse in tactics. Every human ship, from the smallest fighter to the largest dreadnought, was an individual reflection of humanity's relentless desire to survive. This was no longer just a battle for freedom or for power, it was a battle for the very essence of what humanity stood for, the will to fight against overwhelming odds, the refusal to bow down, and the belief that no matter the size of the enemy, they would always rise again. As the first volley of energy blasts from the Cormac hit the human ships, the atmosphere crackled with tension. The space around them lit up with the glow of weapons fire, each burst of light a testament to the deadly nature of this war. The Devastator fired once more, its beam cutting through space like a fiery sword. A nearby human dreadnought exploded in a flash of light, its hull shredded by the powerful energy wave. Yet, as the Scarens celebrated the destruction, they failed to notice that their own fleets were beginning to show signs of vulnerability. Carter's plan, a risky and unconventional one, was already in motion. She had instructed every fleet to spread out, not to form a singular line of defense, but to create a swarm of movement that would make it impossible for the Scarens to focus their fire. The human ships darted and weaved, engaging in hit-and-run tactics that had been perfected over years of war. The human fighters, nimble and small compared to the Scarens' hulking warships, began to target weak points in the Scarens' armor and weapon systems. The Scarens, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tactics, were forced to adapt quickly. They had relied on their sheer size and firepower to overwhelm their enemies, but now, for the first time in the war, they were being forced into a defensive position. Their warships, though superior in raw firepower, could not match the unpredictability and ingenuity of human strategy. Carter's voice echoed through the command deck of the Endurance. "Move the fleet in closer. We need to draw them in, get within range of the Cormac. We need to neutralize their flagship before they can fire again." The human ships closed in, knowing that this would be their only chance to strike. The Cormac, with its massive weapons array, was the linchpin of the Scarens' forces. If they could disable it, the war would be over. But to get close enough, they would have to navigate through the barrage of fire from the Scarens' remaining warships. As the human fleet approached, the tension became unbearable. Every ship, every fighter, had a single goal: survive long enough to strike the Cormac. They dodged incoming fire, and their shields flickered as they absorbed the deadly energy from the Scarens' cannons. The human fighters engaged in a series of daring maneuvers, zipping between the massive Scarens' ships, firing their weapons and disabling vital systems with precision. And then, amidst the chaos, the human fleet began its final push. Admiral Carter gave the order, and the Endurance surged forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the battlefield. As the massive warship closed in on the Cormac, Carter's heart raced. The fate of the galaxy depended on the outcome of this moment. She felt the weight of every soldier, every civilian, every life that had been lost up until now. The human fleet was now within striking distance of the Cormac. This was it. The final, decisive strike that would either destroy their enemies or doom humanity to extinction. As Carter's ship maneuvered to within weapons range, her tactical officers fired the final salvo, an experimental missile designed to pierce the Cormac's shield. For the first time in the war, the Cormac's defenses faltered. The missile hit its mark, tearing through the flagship's energy shield and causing a catastrophic chain reaction. The Scarran's flagship began to break apart, its hull disintegrating in a spectacular explosion. With its destruction, the rest of the Scarran's fleet was thrown into disarray, their command structure crippled. Victory was within reach, but at a great cost. As the Cormac collapsed, the human fleet continued to fight against the remaining Scarran's forces, but the odds had now tipped in their favor. The Scarrans had lost their most powerful weapon, and the humans had proven, once again, that no matter the challenge, they would always rise to meet it. The explosion of the Cormac sent shockwaves through the galaxy, but it was far from the end of the war. The Scarrans, though reeling from the loss of their flagship, were not a species easily defeated. In the wake of their devastation, they began to regroup, determined to exact vengeance on the humans who had so narrowly escaped annihilation. But the destruction of the Cormac had shifted the balance of power irreversibly. The Scarrans had underestimated the resilience and adaptability of humanity, and now they faced a new enemy, one with a fire in its heart that would not be easily extinguished. Admiral Carter's victory was hailed across the human colonies as a monumental triumph, but she knew that the war was far from over. The Scarrans, now fractured and desperate, would not go quietly. They would learn from their mistakes, adapt to humanity's tactics, and find a way to strike back with renewed force. Carter had expected retaliation, and she prepared for it. The next phase of the war would not be fought on the front lines, but in the shadows, where intelligence and subterfuge would become as vital as military might. In the aftermath of the Cormac's destruction, human fleets began to fortify their defenses, reinforcing key colonies and preparing for the inevitable Scarran's counterattack. But it wasn't just military might that the humans needed to secure victory, they needed allies. The Scarran's brutal methods had created enemies throughout the galaxy, and now was the time for humanity to forge new alliances, to unite with species who had long suffered under the Scarran's oppression. The first such alliance came with the Eldreth, a race of telepathic beings who had been subjugated by the Scarrans for centuries. The Eldreth had long been considered a lost cause, a species too weak to stand up to the mighty Scarrans. But with the humans' unexpected victory, they saw a flicker of hope. The Eldreth's leader, a wise and ancient being named Teleth, offered their assistance, bringing with them the power of their collective mind. The Eldreth's telepathic abilities allowed them to act as a network, relaying crucial intelligence across vast distances and anticipating enemy movements before they happened. This new alliance was a game-changer, providing humanity with a significant advantage in the war. Meanwhile, the Scarrans regrouped, licking their wounds and licking their pride. Their retreat from the battlefield had been more humiliating than they were willing to admit, and they quickly set about rebuilding their fleet. But even with their advanced technology and vast resources, they were now facing a united front, one that included humanity, the Eldreth, and a host of other oppressed species who were now rallying under the banner of resistance. In their desperation, the Scarrans began to deploy a new weapon, one that would change the course of the war yet again. This weapon was not a massive flagship like the Cormac, but something far more insidious, a biological weapon, designed to spread like a virus, capable of wiping out entire populations without warning. It was called the Wraith Plague, and its creators had hoped it would be the ultimate deterrent, a weapon of fear so great that no species would dare resist the Scarrans. But the Scarrans had underestimated the adaptability of the human race once again. The Wraith Plague was released on a small, isolated human colony, one that had been struggling to hold its ground against Scarran's forces. The plague spread quickly, infecting thousands within days, leaving the colony in a state of panic and devastation. But rather than crumble in the face of the biological terror, the humans fought back with every resource they had. Dr. Matthews, the scientist who had once cracked the Scarran's energy shield technology, led a team of researchers in developing an antidote. The antidote was painstakingly developed in secret, a race against time to save the colony and stop the plague from spreading further. Dr. Matthews' team, with the help of the Eldreth's telepathic network, discovered that the Scarens' weapon was not perfect. There were weaknesses, flaws that humanity could exploit. The Eldreth were able to tap into the minds of infected individuals, guiding the human teams to the heart of the Scarens' bioweapon research. It was a high-stakes operation, but the humans, never one to shy away from a challenge, launched a daring raid on the Scarens' secret research base. The mission was a success, and within weeks, humanity had not only neutralized the plague but also turned the tide against the Scarens' biological warfare program. In the meantime, the Scarens' hold on their empire began to weaken. The galaxy, once filled with species too afraid to defy them, had started to turn. Every victory, every battle won by humanity and their allies, was a blow to the Scarens' empire. The resistance grew stronger, and their unity became an unshakable force. The Scarens, once unchallenged in their rule, found themselves surrounded by enemies on all sides. Their brutal tactics no longer held the same power, and their arrogance was their undoing. Admiral Carter, ever the strategist, knew that this was humanity's chance to strike a decisive blow. She had the Scarens on the ropes, and it was time to end the war once and for all. She ordered a full-scale assault on the Scarens' remaining strongholds, a final push to shatter their military might and bring the war to its conclusion. The final battles were fierce and relentless, with casualties on both sides. But humanity's resolve had never been stronger. The Scarens, their resources stretched thin and their leadership fractured, could no longer stand against the combined forces of humanity and their allies. One by one, their defenses crumbled, and the empire they had built for millennia began to collapse. And as the last of the Scarens' warships were destroyed, and their once mighty empire fell into ruin, humanity stood victorious. The war had been long and costly, but in the end, humanity had proven that no matter how fierce the enemy, no matter how insurmountable the odds, they would never give up. They would always fight back. And with the fall of the Scarens, the galaxy had been forever changed. The aftermath of the war was both triumphant and bittersweet. The galaxy, once ravaged by the Scarens' brutal campaign of conquest, was now left to rebuild. The cost of victory was heavy, countless lives had been lost, entire worlds reduced to rubble, and entire species had been torn apart by the conflict. But humanity, forged in the fires of war, stood resolute in the face of its scars. The war had tested their very essence, and in the end, they had emerged not just as survivors, but as leaders, stewards of a galaxy that had long been oppressed. Admiral Carter, now a legend in her own right, found herself not at the center of a celebration, but at the helm of a new era of diplomacy. With the fall of the Scarens, humanity had inherited the mantle of leadership in the galaxy. But this was no easy task. The war had fractured many alliances, created deep wounds between species, and left a galaxy in need of reconstruction, not just of its cities and planets, but of its very soul. Carter had always been a strategist, but now, she found herself navigating the delicate world of politics and diplomacy. The human race, once isolated and divided, was now at the center of a new galactic order. Old enemies were now allies, and new challenges arose. The victory over the Scarens had left a power vacuum, and many species sought to fill that void. Some wanted peace and cooperation, while others, emboldened by the war's end, sought to impose their own will on the galaxy. Among the most important of these new alliances was with the Eldreth. The telepathic race had proven invaluable during the war, and their wisdom and insight were now critical to the peace process. The Eldreth's leader, Teleth, had been a voice of reason throughout the conflict, and now, with the war won, he became a trusted ally of humanity. Together, they worked to form a coalition of species, one dedicated not just to preventing future conflict, but to ensuring the peace would endure. However, not all species in the galaxy were ready to accept this new order. A faction of rebellious worlds, led by those who had once been subjugated by the Scarens, now sought to exert their newfound independence. They saw the rise of humanity as just another empire waiting to oppress them. This faction, known as the Sovereign Coalition, began to form a military alliance of its own, determined to challenge humanity's influence and resist the growing political power of the human-led coalition. In this post-war landscape, Dr. Elijah Matthews, the scientist who had played a pivotal role in humanity's victory, found himself at the forefront of a new battle, this time not one of weapons, but of ideas. As the head of a new intergalactic research council, he sought to ensure that the technological advancements humanity had achieved would be used to benefit all sentient beings, not just a select few. But even as he worked to promote peace through science, he found his efforts constantly undermined by factions seeking to use these innovations for power and control. The galaxy was now a powder keg, and the peace humanity had fought so hard to achieve was fragile. The seeds of future conflict were already being sown, as those who had once fought alongside humanity now questioned whether their new allies would honor their autonomy or seek to dominate them as the Scarens had done. The human race, once the underdog, was now the beacon of hope for many, but also a target for those who feared the rise of a new power. Admiral Carter, now a galactic stateswoman, faced the growing tension head-on. She knew the lessons of the war all too well, the importance of unity, but also the dangers of unchecked power. Humanity's rise to the top had been earned, but it was no guarantee of lasting peace. To avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, she pushed for a new era of galactic cooperation, where no species would dominate and no race would be forced into submission. But even as she championed peace, Carter couldn't ignore the whispers of dissent that grew louder with each passing day. The Sovereign Coalition's leaders, emboldened by their newfound strength, began to rally their forces. They had the support of numerous systems that had long been oppressed by the Scarens, and now, they sought to assert their place in the galaxy. The fragile peace was teetering on the brink of collapse. Humanity, despite its victory, was now faced with a new challenge: how to lead in a galaxy full of species with competing interests and conflicting visions of the future. The lessons of the past, the horrors of the Scarens, the sacrifices made, the lives lost, reminded them all of the cost of peace, but also the price of failure. The path ahead would be fraught with peril, and the human race would need every ounce of strength, wisdom, and resolve to navigate it. Dr. Matthews, alongside Carter and Telleth, began to forge a new diplomatic strategy, one based not just on military strength, but on mutual respect and shared goals. The goal was simple: to prevent the rise of another Scaren's empire, to ensure that no one species would ever again be allowed to dictate the fate of the galaxy. As the various factions convened for what would be known as the Galactic Accord, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The peace that had been won at such great cost was now on the line, and every decision, every negotiation, every word spoken would shape the future of the galaxy. Humanity had won the war, but the true test had only just begun. Would they rise to the challenge, or would they fall to the same temptations of power and domination that had led to the war in the first place? The galaxy waited, holding its breath. The fate of the future lay in the hands of those who had fought, sacrificed, and survived the war. The galaxy had been forever changed, and it was now up to humanity to decide what kind of future it would build. The legacy of the war was still being written, and whether it would be one of peace or further conflict depended on the choices they made in the days to come. The war had changed everything, but the real battle was just beginning. The Galactic Accord was a fragile hope in a galaxy still scarred by the brutality of the war. The delegates from countless species gathered on a neutral world, one that had seen its fair share of destruction during the conflict. The atmosphere was tense. The weight of the past bore down on every conversation, and every faction, no matter how well-intentioned, held their secrets and fears close. Humanity had led the charge against the Scarens, but now, they found themselves standing on the precipice of a new challenge: how to ensure that the galaxy's future would not be shaped by the same mistakes that had brought them to war in the first place. Admiral Carter, though battle-worn and weary, was still at the forefront of this new effort. She understood that her role had changed, that the battlefield was no longer defined by weapons and tactics, but by diplomacy and negotiation. Humanity's success in defeating the Scarens had placed them in a position of power, but it also made them the focal point of the galaxy's aspirations and fears. No longer seen as the underdogs, humanity now had to walk the line between leadership and oppression, guiding others without succumbing to the very temptations that had led to the war. The Sovereign Coalition, led by the most vocal and rebellious factions, was a constant threat to the delicate peace the humans were trying to broker. They had many supporters, worlds that had suffered under Scaran's rule and were wary of a new galaxy dominated by a single species, no matter how noble its intentions. The sovereigns feared that humanity's rise would mark the beginning of another empire, one that could grow as powerful and oppressive as the Scarans had been. It was an understandable concern, but one that threatened to derail the fragile unity the galaxy had begun to forge. Despite the intense negotiations, the pressure of maintaining peace was wearing on Carter. Every compromise she made seemed to be met with resistance, and no matter how hard she pushed for unity, there were always voices that sought to pull the galaxy in different directions. The meetings at the Galactic Accord were often long, heated, and filled with distrust. Old wounds ran deep, and while some species had begun to trust humanity, many more remained cautious. Dr. Matthews, now a key figure in the Intergalactic Council, worked tirelessly to address the scientific and technological concerns that were shaping the negotiations. The rapid advancements humanity had made in fields like energy shields, bioengineering, and weapons technology had made them the envy and fear of many species. The Eldrath, with their telepathic abilities, had become vital allies, helping to facilitate conversations and provide insights into the collective psyche of the different species. But even their assistance could not overcome the deep-seated anxieties that permeated the discussions. One of the most contentious issues was the fate of the Scarans' remaining loyalists, those who had fled the battlefield and scattered across the galaxy, often seeking refuge on distant, uninhabited worlds. The Sovereign Coalition pushed for their immediate removal, seeing them as a threat to the new order. Humanity, however, was determined to offer them a chance at redemption. The war had destroyed much, but Carter believed that humanity's strength lay not in vengeance but in forgiveness. She proposed a program of rehabilitation and reintegration, offering the Scarans' loyalists a place within the new galactic order, provided they renounced their violent ways. The negotiations were at a crossroads. The tension in the room was palpable as Carter faced opposition from both sides, the Sovereign Coalition, who saw this as an unforgivable act of leniency, and the more established species, who felt that humanity's offer was an unnecessary risk. Carter had fought for so long to bring peace to the galaxy, but now, she realized, it wasn't just about winning the war. It was about ensuring that the galaxy would never be plunged into darkness again. As the debates raged on, Carter received word that something had triggered a new conflict on the edges of the galaxy. A small, unknown faction had launched a surprise attack on a peaceful colony, killing hundreds and sending a shockwave of fear throughout the galaxy. It was an act of terrorism, and though no one knew who was behind it, the attack sent the message that not all species were ready to accept the peace that had been negotiated. This act of violence threatened to undo everything. The Sovereign Coalition demanded retaliation, while others insisted on caution and investigation. In the midst of this chaos, Dr. Matthews discovered something unsettling, a signal that indicated the attack had been orchestrated by a hidden faction within the Scarans' remnants, a group who refused to accept defeat and were willing to sabotage the peace at any cost. This shadow group, known only as the Black Sun, had infiltrated the ranks of the galaxy's most powerful factions, sowing discord and manipulating events to prevent the establishment of a lasting peace. With the revelation of the Black Sun's involvement, Carter knew the stakes had just been raised. This was no longer just about negotiating a treaty. It was about ensuring that peace could survive long enough to take root. Humanity's leadership would be tested in ways it had never been before. The galaxy was still filled with fractures, old hatreds, and new dangers, and it was clear that the war was not truly over, it had simply shifted into a new phase. Admiral Carter, with Dr. Matthews, Teleth, and the other leaders who had been instrumental in humanity's rise, quickly shifted their focus. They understood that the true battle was not won through negotiations alone, it would be won through vigilance, unity, and the ability to confront the forces that sought to plunge the galaxy into chaos once again. As humanity's leaders, they could not afford to rest. The peace that had been so hard-won was now under threat, and it was up to them to ensure that the light of hope would not be extinguished by those who wished to see it go out. And so, the negotiations continued. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the question of whether humanity could lead it into a new era of peace and cooperation remained unanswered. But one thing was certain, the war had not changed just the galaxy, it had changed humanity itself. Now, as they faced the Black Sun and the forces of division, it was humanity's chance to prove that they had learned from the past and could create a future of unity, not just survival. The galaxy teetered on the edge of a new conflict, and humanity found itself once again at the center of the storm. The attack by the Black Sun had thrown the fragile peace into turmoil, and now the human-led coalition had to face not just the remnants of the Scarens, but a shadowy force that sought to tear apart everything they had worked for. Admiral Carter, Dr. Matthews, Telleth, and the other leaders of the Galactic Coalition understood that the stakes were higher than ever. The galaxy was fractured, and the light of peace was in danger of being extinguished by those who still believed that power could only be maintained through violence and fear. The Black Sun had proven to be more than just a splinter group; they were a hidden network, operating within the very fabric of the galaxy's power structures. Their influence stretched far and wide, infiltrating the highest echelons of military and political leadership. Their ultimate goal was simple: to prevent any species from uniting under the banner of peace and to ensure that war would always be the galaxy's way of life. They understood that as long as the galaxy remained divided, their power would persist. And they were willing to do anything, including inciting violence and chaos, to ensure that the old ways of domination would never truly die. Carter, now more determined than ever, realized that humanity's true test had arrived. She had led humanity to victory over the Scarens, but the real battle was not about military might, it was about trust, unity, and the ability to overcome the forces of division that still lurked in the shadows. The negotiations at the Galactic Accord had been an attempt to secure lasting peace, but peace could never be achieved by mere words alone. The galaxy needed a true solution, a way to expose and dismantle the Black Sun before they could plunge the galaxy back into war. Dr. Matthews, alongside the Eldreth, had been researching ways to track the Black Sun's influence across the galaxy. With their telepathic abilities, the Eldreth were able to tap into the hidden currents of thought and communication that the Black Sun had used to manipulate events. It was a dangerous game, one that risked exposing their allies to further attacks by the Black Sun's operatives, but it was their only hope. The Black Sun's network had to be dismantled from within, and humanity, along with their allies, would have to be the ones to do it. Carter, Matthews, and Telleth knew that the first step in confronting the Black Sun was to expose them to the galaxy. The coalition's leaders, now united by necessity, began to work in secret to uncover the truth. The first breakthrough came when the Eldreth uncovered a hidden transmission, one that had been disguised as a routine military report. The transmission revealed that a significant portion of the Sovereign Coalition's leadership had been compromised by the Black Sun. There were operatives planted within every faction, waiting to strike when the galaxy's leaders were most vulnerable. The revelation sent shockwaves through the coalition, but it also gave Carter and her allies the leverage they needed. Armed with this knowledge, they confronted the Sovereign Coalition's leaders. The truth was undeniable: the Black Sun had been working to manipulate the factions, sowing dissent and mistrust at every turn. Carter understood that the next step was critical. She couldn't allow the galaxy to descend into further chaos. It was time for humanity to step forward not just as a military power, but as the beacon of unity. The galaxy's leaders convened once again, this time with a new urgency. Carter stood before the assembly, her voice steady and resolute. She didn't ask for trust, she demanded it. Humanity had fought to bring peace to the galaxy, and now it was time to take the final step. She proposed a sweeping initiative, one that would require total transparency among all factions and the dismantling of any covert operations that could destabilize the new order. The Black Sun's operatives had to be exposed, and the galaxy's power structures had to be rebuilt from the ground up. But even as Carter spoke, a new threat emerged. A fleet of warships, seemingly from nowhere, appeared on the horizon. These ships were unlike any the galaxy had seen before, dark, heavily armed, and seemingly capable of cloaking themselves from detection. The Black Sun had made its move, launching a direct assault on the galactic capital itself. The final battle for the future of the galaxy had begun. In the midst of the attack, the Coalition's forces, led by humanity's most experienced generals, made their stand. Carter, ever the tactician, had prepared for this moment. She had anticipated the Black Sun's final play, and with the help of the Eldreth's telepathic network, humanity's forces launched a counterattack that took the Black Sun by surprise. The battle raged in the skies above the capital, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Black Sun's ships were powerful, but they lacked the unity that humanity's forces possessed. The human-led coalition fought not just for survival, but for the galaxy's future. The conflict reached its zenith when Carter led a final assault against the Black Sun's flagship, a massive, cloaked vessel that had remained hidden until the last possible moment. Dr. Matthews, working with the Eldreth, had managed to find a way to disable the ship's cloaking technology, allowing the human forces to strike with precision. The battle was fierce, and as the flagship's shields began to falter, Carter led a boarding party to confront the Black Sun's leaders. In a dramatic confrontation aboard the flagship, Carter faced the leader of the Black Sun, a shadowy figure who revealed himself to be one of the last surviving members of the Scarran's High Command. This was the true mastermind behind the galaxy's unrest, the one who had been orchestrating the chaos from behind the scenes. In a final act of defiance, the Black Sun leader sought to destroy the ship, taking everyone down with him. But humanity's resolve proved stronger. Carter and her team managed to disable the self-destruct mechanism, capturing the leader and exposing the full extent of the Black Sun's network to the galaxy. With the Black Sun destroyed, the galaxy was left to rebuild once more. But this time, the rebuilding was not just about infrastructure or military strength, it was about trust and unity. Humanity, now firmly at the center of a new galactic order, had proven that even in the darkest of times, the strength of unity could overcome the forces of division. The war had changed everything, but in the end, it had brought the galaxy closer to a future of lasting peace, one built on the foundation of cooperation, not domination. Admiral Carter, Dr. Matthews, and Tellith stood together, looking out over a galaxy that was no longer fractured by war. There would be challenges ahead, but humanity had proven that they could face them, and no matter what the future held, they would always stand for peace, for unity, and for the future of the galaxy. The war had ended, but the legacy of what humanity had accomplished would echo through the stars for generations to come.